And this is the thing that you want to understand, because the basic thing is you want to cover the ground. The ground should never be exposed. And whatever you have in your, it will work. And I've used everything from straw, grass clippings, leaves, animal manures, and they all work well. And if you have nothing but rocks, rock I'll just tell you, as a kid growing up in California, it was very, very dry in the summertime. We'd want to go fishing, and we'd find it, the whole ground everywhere around is just completely baked. It's just as dry as it can be, hard. We'd find a large rock, and you roll it over. Underneath it was damp, and there were worms sticking their heads up. It said two things. One is the rock retains moisture, and two, there's enough mineral content coming off the rock to supply food for those worms. And so if you have nothing but rock, if you'll lay rock on the ground around your plants and trees, they will retain moisture and deposit minerals. So just whatever organic, natural thing you have at your disposal, it will work. But having used them all, I come back to wood chips and I see where it's been for a while and what it's done. It is my favorite. It just is the nicest thing to use. I've used bark in the past and sawdust, and things don't grow in it. You have to fertilize. It may hold moisture well, but it's just not a good material. But the very finest material on the planet that I've used are chip branches, and I've found no tree except eucalyptus that would be a problem. Eucalyptus has an oil in it, and things don't grow in it. But other than that, I haven't found any trees that don't work wonderfully for growing things in. And I love that question about cedar, because see, I live in the woods, and we have a lot of evergreens, and there's fir trees, there's hemlocks, and there's western red cedars. And as I look at my woods out here, there's a whole clump of western red cedars. And in the fall, after we have a dry summer, they flag more than ever any evergreen out there. And flagging means the interior needles turn brown, because cedars, because they have shallow roots, are very water sensitive. And so the first good wind that comes up, all those brown needles fall to the ground around all those trees. And I look out there, and everything's just totally lush green. And so even though they've told me that cedar has an oil in it, and it's probably not good to grow things in, I look at nature and I see no negative effect. And my response and my thoughts are that even if there's something toxic in those needles, by the time it gets to the root, nature has broken it down and changed it so it's no longer toxic. Because I don't see anybody coming out in nature and taking that stuff out of there, and everything around it is just lush, green, beautiful. So from that perspective, and I have all kinds of cedar in my orchard. I get cedar all the time from tree services. I put it all down and I have no negative response. Hay and straw, both of them come from plants that produce seed. The straw is they've taken the seed off, and the hay is the plant that's matured. They're feeding the animals. Both of them had seeds, and depending on how clean, the hay is always going to have seed, but the straw can be clear of seed depending on how well they harvested, kind of thing. But in both of those situations, you've got the possibility of having seed that when you get in your garden, you water, it's going to come up and grow, and it'll appear as grass, because that's how it starts out. And so that can be a pretty labor-intensive process, getting all that out.
What you want to do when you're picking out a material is I like to smell it. It should be fairly innocuous. It should be not a lot of smell when it's finished. Some materials I've picked up, and if you kind of then I have a tendency to go, well, it's pretty acidic, or it's some chemicals in there.
I wish a camera could pick up the odor. Whenever I bring people, I always get a handful and let them smell it. And they're just amazed at the incredible, rich smell that's coming in. Basically, it's minerals. That's what you're smelling. And if you go to a typical farm, you pick up a soil that has no odor, which indicates there's no minerals present. And minerals is what give flavor to food and nutrition to food.
And this is the thing that I was made aware of. Don't mix it with the soil on top, and so it will decompose and it will smell good. You have even mushrooms growing in there. Then you know for sure it's already decomposing in the right way, because that's the beginning of soil becoming, the mulch becoming soil. And the fragrance is so that you know you're doing the right thing, yeah.
When you have that dark, smells good, sweet smell, that's soil right there. But you go and you pick it up and it has no smell and it's all tan and gray or white. That's what tells you whether it's alive or not.
In your garden, if you got weeds and stuff, just get rid of them, or if there's just a lot of them, just knock them down and cover it. See, the organic material, the weeds and the grass make good fertilizer, good organic material. So don't rip it out because it's beneficial. But if you cover it and 4 to 6 inches, it'll all suffocate and die. Now there's some grasses that are more tenacious, such as quackgrass, and I have a place in Swim over here that has that quackgrass, but I put the wood chips a foot deep, and I was amazed. Nothing came through it. Totally suffocated it all, and it died. So it makes great fertilizer. And like an orchard, if you got an orchard already in place, a bunch of trees with some grass grow on it, just cover that. Just leave all the grass right there. Just cover it with the wood chips, and that grass will make good organic material and be feeding those trees. If you don't have a lot of wood chips and you're afraid the grass will come through, newspaper works the best, because when newspaper gets wet, it gets very, very limp and just adheres to that surface, and it will suffocate everything. And the other thing about newspaper, it has a very short life. Very soon it will turn back to dirt and be gone. So it doesn't last long. If you use cardboard, if you have some not, it's not a level place and you got some dips, that grass underneath there will have some airspace, and it'll survive. Well, the ideal time, and I love working with nature, is in the fall, because it's going to rain all winter, and you'll find with wood chips the incredible advantages. There's no sponge that'll hold water like wood chips. I'm amazed at the water it holds. And for example, we live in a place where just 70 miles down the road there's a rainforest. It gets 15 feet, I'm not saying inches, 15 feet of rainwater a year. And when you walk in the woods, the forest there's no water under your feet. It's not spongy, it's not damp, it's damp, but it's not soggy. And it's amazing, those wood chips totally absorb that kind of water quantity. And the other thing that's amazing about wood chips is when there's not enough, like it's like now, if you look at my grass out in the front there, it's all brown, but in the wood chips in my orchard, it maintains the moisture. And here's the incredible thing about God and His design. When there's too much water, the wood chips displace it, and when there's not enough, it retains it. And at that point, I'd have to check out, because that's too big for me. No matter where you are, in pots or whatever, compost still will grow at the best. And so it's just whether you're in a multi-100-acre, 1,000-acre, farm, or a tiny little apartment. I have friends growing good kale in the wintertime in pots on their porch, the apartment. Does fine, And again, compost, this is the ideal material, whether it's in a pot or in the ground. Look at my orchard here. I've got nasturtiums growing underneath my apple trees in full shade, and they're blooming great. And what I would do is just cover that whole orchard in wood chips, and I'd prune my trees open to get a little bit of light through, and you can grow a great garden in that orchard under those trees. No problem. I find it quite interesting that in our thinking, we think that we can improve on God, we can do it better than Him by tilling and cultivating, where He doesn't do that. He just lays everything on top of the ground and grows everything great. And we think, because we have the tools and the capacity, which is kind of crazy, because God can do anything, that we can do it better. We really miss it. Where you plant in the wood chips will depend on how well they've compacted. When you first put them on, they're going to be very loose and airy, and so you don't want to plant in that material because there's just too much airspace. So you want to pull them back until you get into something pretty solid, and then plant in that material. And as the plants come up, then you can take your wood chips and push them back around the plants, because they'll retain moisture and put down nutrients for you. And you'll find that the next year you plant, you won't have to go as deep, because the stuff starts breaking down and becoming quite compact. When you use the organic approach up front, it's kind of a lot of work to bring in those wood chips, because you got to cover the ground. It takes a lot of cover. But over time, what I found at my place is that you start having this incredible gain. Initially, you put a lot down, and you have to, in a few years, you got to put it back again. But I'll just use this example here. I hadn't put anything up in this garden here for the last 3 years. I just put a new layer up here, and I expect that'll last me probably 4 or 5 years, because I'm finding that each time I put a layer on, it's a lot longer before I have to do it again, because I have this incredible base built. Because the ground is so porous and so soft, they just push themselves out of each other's way, and they never have to be thin. And it just makes it so much easier, because thinning is time consuming as well as very wasteful, because you're wasting this little plant that came up and you're just going to throw it away. Where in this stuff, and you see the carrots in the pictures, and they're just dense in there, but because this stuff is so porous and so easy to move, they just push themselves out of the way. The regular dirt is so compacted that they can't move. They'll smash into each other, kind of, because they can't get it out of the way, because the dirt's compacted. In nature, everything does just fine, because they have a really insulated cover with those needles. And the same thing in my orchard. And I have carrots out here all winter, and beets, and actually when the ground freezes, they get sweeter, because the sugar comes up. It doesn't hurt them, because they're well insulated. And my kale grows winter. I have a cilantro all winter. I have parsley all winter. And it's just great. Where if I had dirt, that ground would freeze hard and kill the roots and be gone.
It seems like the wood chips are creating, an average soil temperature that's higher than you might get from, just standard soil. You have less die-off overall because of it.
Well, when you till something into the ground, you see that the nitrogen immediately goes to work to break it down. And so when you put in a lot of wood chips into the ground, because they're coarse, heavy material, it requires a lot of nitrogen to break it down, so it is tied up. This is what I think is so interesting. Anytime you start, you put stuff into the ground, you have issues. I've had scientists come here and tell me, well, you're going to destroy these trees with these wood chips because it's type all the nitrogen, make your soil acidic. And I says, well, help me. How come my leaves are so dark green? I mean, I think nitrogen is what makes. I says, I mean, I don't see a nitrogen type here. I mean, what are you talking about? But from their perspective, you see, they're always thinking that you're tilling it in. And if you do till it in, you will have a nitrogen type. But if you lay it on top like God does, there's no problem. And again, it breaks down to this most incredible, wonderful compost. And I just point out, look at how beautiful, dark green everything in nature is. And it's maintained on wood products, needles and leaves, cones, broken branches that no one rakes up. When you're using animal manures, you want to make sure that they're not eating grass hay. Or if they are, you're going to get a big lawn in your garden, because the seed goes through the digestive system intact and will come out and sprout and grow. And the other thing about manures today, and this is so sad, is that you have to be really careful that you know where it came from, because there's one company who raises chickens who openly says we feed our chickens arsenic. You know, I mean, arsenic's poison. You have to, and they do it to control parasites. And you have to ask, well, why are they controlling? Why do the chickens have parasites? Well, because they're fed garbage. And so, unless you know the source of your manure today, it would be very, it could be dangerous, not good for you. I would use organic fertilizers, and one of my favorites, because it's water soluble, is fish emulsion. That is really effective, and you just mix it up in a thing. You can water it with a watering can, and it's very bioavailable. It goes to work very quickly. Good fertilizers, good organic manures, if they're clean, work well. But fish emulsion is probably one of the better ones that I know of. I want to mention, watering is wonderful. I don't have to do a lot of it here because I have the wood chips, but it's not a negative. If you have water, the water going through the wood chips create compost tea, so it's ideal. And the beauty about wood chips is you can't overwater. So it's not a problem. Watering is never the problem. Lack of water could be a problem, but overwatering is never an issue. As you pull it aside and you examine it, you can kind of intuitively tell, is this dry, or if it's wet, it's fine. If it's not, then wet it. The problem we have in our area with using things like grass clippings and straw, when it rains a lot, they'll get really wet and slimy and be really hard to work with. You slide on it and it's just uncomfortable. Or with wood chips, no matter how much water, it's just a very pleasant material to work with. In nature, there are many beneficial bacteria and things that are breaking down soil, making, turning the soil back to dirt, which are beneficial. And I always come to my wood chips and I all saw this all white mold and stuff. And no, that's really rich stuff. And this thing is working. It's alive and it's breaking down and going back to soil. If you don't have a lot of wood chips and you're afraid the grass would come through, newspaper works the best, because when newspaper gets wet, it gets very, very limp and just adheres to that surface, and it will suffocate everything. And the other thing about newspaper, it has a very short life. Very soon it will turn back to dirt and be gone. So it doesn't last long. If you use cardboard, if you have some not, it's not a level place and you got some dips, that grass underneath there will have some airspace and it'll survive. If you've got thistles and deep-rooted weeds like dandelions and those kind of things, those will be a challenge, and it'd be ideal to dig those out. This pasture here, out here in the front, was full of thistles when I came, and I just diligently every year, as soon as I see them bloom, go out with a shovel and dig them out. And there are none in there today because I've been on top of it. And again, those kind of things, you've got to hand dig. You got to get down to the root, get the whole thing out, and it's a lot of labor, but there's no other way to get rid of them. I'll tell you this, just to give you a hint. When we were in California, we used to have a lot of problem with aphids on citrus. And how I dealt with that was I would get garlic and jalapeno peppers or serrano peppers and put them in a blender, and then make a spray of it and spray my trees. And what I find is all insects are gringos. They can't handle the heat, and they leave. Doesn't hurt any fruit, doesn't hurt any leaves, and it frees you up from the insects. And so it's a very, very effective way to get rid of insects. I've been really blessed here at my place for quite a few, at least a couple decades. I grew all this good fruit and never had any problem with anything. In one year, it was really very, very sad. the crows, for some reason, decided they wanted to move in and eat my fruit. And every morning about 5 o'clock, they come in a huge flock of them. You could just hear them coming, just squawking their heads off, and they come in there. And it's not like they would eat the whole apple. They'd bite into one and go to another, and just create all these damaged, bird bites in my apples, and I couldn't use them. And I was just so frustrated. I says, God, I need help. The way I got out there one day with my 22, and for some reason, I got a shot at one, and it flew off, and I thought, oh, man. But anyway, I went down to my pond the other day, the next day, and I found it floating in the water. I got him. And so I put up it's a piece of PVC pipe on my fence post, and I hung that crow up there. So the next morning at 5 o'clock, I got outside because I wanted to see what would happen. So at 5 o'clock, they're coming in, squawking their heads off, oh, we're going to go eat today, kind of a thing. And as they started to fly in, they noticed that dead crow, and their whole sound changed. They started making this really loud, not their normal happy sound. And they started circling and getting higher and higher, and they never came down again. And it was awesome. I just man, I had dead crow hanging up there. It's like they're smart enough to realize this is no place to be. This is not safe here, and it worked. And it just told me, it was a great scarecrow. Well, I think it's quite interesting. If you look at nature, plants go to seed. They do it every year. They flower, go to seed, and the seeds fall. Same place. The wind may carry them a few more feet, but this is something that happens every year after year, decade after decade, century after century, and there's no problem. Everything looks good out there. And I love that. It's just, and I'm seeing it happen there, and says, well, why not here? And I'm doing it, and I'm getting the same response, no problem. And it's very convenient and very nice. Yeah, pH is, I guess, an issue for, things, and so a lot of people, they'll add lime or, other things to get their soil right. But it's, labor intensive and a lot of work, and I don't even know what my pH is, and I don't even care because everything seems to grow really well. And I have acid-loving plants that grow right next to alkaline-loving plants, and they're all doing great. And so I just like the ease of not having to be concerned about having to make the adjustments and keep it up, because nature just does it really well all on its own with not a lot of work. Makes it real easy.